Hello, and welcome to the latest episode of the Low Budget Review Show. I am your host, Eric Smith. Today, I'm talking about Doc Savage, The Sinister Shadow by Kenneth Robeson, aka Will Murray. And this is part of the Wild Adventures, the all new Wild Adventures of Doc Savage. And for the first time officially, I don't know, Doc Savage and the Shadow are going to meet. They've met in comic books before, but a number of things in this book talk about how this is like the first sort of official, maybe in canon meeting of Doc Savage and the Shadow. What's it about, you might ask? Well, first of all, Doc Savage, the man of bronze, and his five companions are adventurers, saving the world time and time again. The Shadow, mysterious figure with his mysterious group of loyal helpers, fights crime in a much more deadly and dark way. So in this book, there have been a number of mysterious deaths, and Lamont Cranston, wealthy man about town, is being blackmailed, and he ends up going to Ham, Theodore Marley Brooks, who's an associate of one of Doc Savage's men, and because he wants help, Lamont Cranston was going to go see someone, the police commissioner, but he couldn't meet him because the police commissioner was called away. So he goes to Ham and says, can I get Doc Savage's help? Things go awry. Doc Savage gets involved. The Shadow's involved. Lots of crazy stuff happens. Crazy pulp action. Okay, so first of all, for the too long didn't watch, I haven't rated it on Goodreads yet because I just finished it, but I'm going to give it 3 out of 5. I liked it, but it didn't blow me away. Now, first of all, I'm a huge fan of both Doc Savage and the Shadow. And for anybody who's a fan of the Shadow or knows anything about the Shadow, I think I need to be clear that this is the literary version of the character the Shadow. So really quickly, the Shadow originated as simply the narrator of the Detective Mystery Hour, I believe is what the old radio show was called. But this mysterious narrator with this mysterious voice was so popular that Street and Smith, the publisher of Detective Mystery Magazine, I think was the name of it, decided to start printing a magazine about the Shadow. So they hired a writer, and the Shadow became a pulp magazine. That was so popular that they made it into a radio show. The radio show was a simplified version of the character from the pulps and added a couple new characters just for the show. And so the version in this is the pulp version, so a much more complicated version of the Shadow than in the radio show. So if you only know the radio show where they talk about, again, Lamont Cranston, wealthy man about town, spoilers, that's not actually the Shadow's real identity. That's going to come up in the first couple of chapters, I think. So it's not a huge spoiler to this book. Anyway, so that's the version of the Shadows, is the literary, the pulp version, not the radio show version. Just in case anybody does decide to read this and gets confused by that. Anyway, so the things I like about this book is it brings Doc Savage and the Shadow together. There's lots of pulp action. We get Doc Savage and 3 of his 5 crew. 2 of them, Rennie and Little John, whichever. They're off doing their own thing. So we've got Long Tom, Ham, and Monk working with Doc Savage, and then we've got the Shadow and all of his people that work for him. And at first, they're sort of butting heads. The Shadow's this mystery figure. A lot of people don't even believe he exists, whereas Doc Savage is this pillar of the community. He's got special. He's a deputized law enforcement officer, essentially. He's got special credentials. Everybody knows who Doc Savage is. People have heard of the Shadow, and there's even the Shadow on the radio, but most people don't believe that he's a real person out doing things. But those who do think he might be real don't know if he's a criminal or a good guy, don't really know anything about him. And so, at first, again, Doc Savage and his crew are clashing with the Shadow and his crew. Eventually, they realize they're on the same side, and they're going to take out this mysterious figure. Again, it's early in the book, so I can tell you he's called the funeral director is the name of the bad guy, because that's how pulps work. They always have to have, he's a mysterious figure. Nobody knows who he is. Nobody knows what he's doing. And he's got this weird, like everybody in his organization is either known as an undertaker or a pallbearer or whatever. And they drive around in hearses and flower cars and things. So it's just that fun pulp adventure. The only problem is, well, there's a couple. One, it is too long for a fun pulp adventure. It's almost 500 pages. And while I have no problem with a 500-page book, if the story warrants it, there is so much of people getting in a chase and people being chased to get away. People get in a chase, whether it's a car chase, an airplane chase, a foot chase, whoever's being chased gets away. People getting captured and escaping. Captured and escaping. Captured and escaping. It gets a bit repetitive. The other thing is it doesn't rely on previous knowledge of the Shadow and his pulp exploits, but they cram so many characters from the Shadow stuff into this book. With Doc Savage, it's him, 3 of his men. The Shadow has 6, 7, 8. I'm not going to take the time now to count them all in my head. A ton of different characters that work for him, and you're given enough information that you can distinguish them as you're reading along for the most part. But there's so much like Shadow stuff going on that there are asterisks and footnotes that tell you what Shadow stories the reference they're making comes from, which is fine. But it just seems like the author, Will Murray, tried too hard to pack everything into one story. There is another book after this one where Doc Savage and the Shadow team up. But I suppose if Will Murray didn't know he was going to get to write another one, maybe he wanted to pack all of that Shadow stuff into this one, but it could have easily been spread out over the 2 books. He didn't have to have it all in here. Could have saved some of it for the other one. It just felt like way too much. I'm trying to think of an example of something like a movie or something where that was done, where they just took everything. I was going to go with like Solo, a Star Wars story, where they feel like they have to show you how he got his name, where his fuzzy dice came from, how he met Chewbacca, how he got his jacket, how he learned to shoot first. All of this stuff. They got to pack it all in. We need to know it all. It's not quite the same because it's not a a prequel story. It is a prequel story to a lot of stuff, but it's not like a prequel story to a giant thing that everybody knows, and they're giving you all this back information. Excuse me. But they are packing in a ton of information for fans, people who are already fans of the Shadow, and I think it's going to put off people that are interested in this book. Maybe you're fans of Doc Savage, not necessarily fans of the Shadow, or people who are fans of the radio show. Anyway, I feel that it's a little too long, a little too repetitive in some of the things that happen, and tries to pack too much of the Shadow and his huge history. You know, there's hundreds of Pulp Shadow stories, although this takes place, I don't know how early it's in his career, but it's not, I'd say it's at least in the first half of the Shadow's career. I think all of the stories that are footnoted are earlier works. Not 100% sure because I'm not an expert, but it is earlier in his career, and yet they're still packing so much stuff in. It's a little too much. It's overwhelming. All of that being said, I did like it. I like this pulp action. I like the characters. I just think it could have been streamlined. I like that cover. But I do think it could have been streamlined. I'm looking over at my Doc Savage books over here, looking at my Shadow books over there, and they're all less than 200 pages. I mean, they were originally in a magazine, a single magazine, had an entire novel-length story. So even if, let's say, it's 200 pages, that's only 400 pages. This is almost 500. And since you're putting them together, you don't need 200 pages for each character. Anyway, but again, if you're a fan of the characters, I think you're going to like this book well enough. If you're interested in checking out these characters, I'd say find the old pulps and read them. But I mean, it's 3 out of 5. I liked it. Not a horrible book. I'm looking forward to reading the other one, which I don't think is this thick. I believe I have it. And now that Doc Savage and the Shadow are friends-ish, we'll see how it goes in the second book. The other thing, one of the other problems is there are a few continuity errors, which is one of my biggest pet peeves. Especially when it's on the same page. But there are things like somebody says they have an office on the 2nd floor, and then Doc Savage goes to that guy's office on the 15th floor. It says that someone gets into the car in the front seat next to Doc Savage, and then 2 sentences later, it says that guy says something from the back seat. I know they're little things, but continuity errors really, really bug me. That's my thing. But anyway, it's not full of them. There's a few. So again, I liked it. Doc Savage, The Sinister Shadow, Kenneth Robeson, actually Will Murray. 3 out of 5 stars. I guess that's it. Question for this video, probably one that I've asked before. Are you a fan of pulp characters? If so, what are your favorites? I obviously am. I've got my Tarzan, my John Carter, Doc Savage, the Avenger, the Shadow over there. I've got the Phantom up there, and of course Conan the Barbarian and the Robert E. Howard characters. More of the Edgar Rice Burroughs characters. I love that stuff. And my favorite, it's really a tough call between Tarzan and Doc Savage. And you do have, like, all the Edgar Rice Burroughs stuff, all the original Edgar Rice Burroughs stuff anyway, written by Edgar Rice Burroughs. Robert E. Howard stuff, which actually isn't a lot, written by Robert E. Howard. But characters like Doc Savage, the Shadow, they had um, pen names. They didn't actually. I think there was another term, house names. I think so. Kenneth Robeson, or however you say it, Robeson, was the house name for Doc Savage, and Lester Dent wrote the majority of the Doc Savage stories, but they would have other people write some to help fill in if Lester Dent fell behind. And the same with the Shadow. Uh, Grant, whatever his name is, was the house name. Walter B. Gibson, I believe, was the actual guy that wrote them. Let's see. There's some stuff about Lester Dent. And this story is actually apparently based on notes and some things that Lester Dent did write. It says he was invited to submit a plot featuring the Shadow. Maxwell Grant is the house name for the Shadow writer. Walter B. Gibson, I believe, is the actual name of the writer. And again, other people would write sort of fill-in stories. Anyway, I don't know where I was going with all of this, just to show off my nerdy pulp hero, nerdiness. Anyway, yes, I'm a huge fan. Love the characters. Yeah, they're not the best written stories ever, but they're exciting and wild and, great flights of fancy with weird contraptions that from, written back in the 30s and 40s that are commonplace now. But what about you? Have you read any of these pulp characters? I would guess Tarzan, John Carter, or Conan would be the most likely. But yeah, just let me know what you think about pulp characters. Do you not care for them? Do you like them? What are your favorites? You know the usual questions. Let me know in the comments below. If you have any comments, questions, or corrections, please put those in the comments below. Comments are open for spoilers. Just post a spoiler warning. We try to be polite here on the Low Budget Review Show. Please like, share, and subscribe, all the usual YouTube stuff. And if you'd care to follow me on other social media, my Twitter is @Ronan5757. My Instagram, where I post pictures of books, comic books, board games, fuzzy animals, is Eric Smith5757. That's Eric with a K, ERIKSMITH5757. And if you're on Blue Sky, I am @EL Smith. That's all I have. This has been the Low Budget Review Show. I have been Eric Smith, and until next time, read more books.